Okay, I go first. I floop the silo of truth.
I am creating a playable and show-accurate version of CardWars from Adventure Time. I'm going to recap what I've done so far, so don't worry if you aren't caught up with the project. I did a thorough analysis on both of the episodes that heavily feature the game, and figured out the turn structure from that, along with a placeholder combat system. Because we don't see one in the show, I decided not to include a mana system, so you essentially get to play 5 cards for the entire game, because you never get to draw without also discarding. I created a bunch of temporary, excessively simple cards and tested my alpha prototype to see if the turn structure functioned, which it did. Now that I have a turn structure, I wanted to take a stab at making a better combat system, since once that's done, I will have a fully playable base game to test with, except for, of course, more cards. Because, essentially, being able to move through a turn and then battle creatures is the bare minimum for a card game like this. Things like setup, lands, and a simulated economy aren't needed, and instead will get layered on later in the design process. I've decided to step back from randomness in the base combat so that the randomness can be added primarily from other mechanics or variables, like keywords on creatures and the current board state. While working on the combat, I couldn't help but acknowledge the large discrepancies in the show on many important mechanics, and while I intend on staying show accurate, these inconsistencies are consistent enough that it is borderline impossible to pin them down exactly. I still plan to make this version faithful to the original, but it's gotten to the point where certain mechanics are impossible to convert one-to-one, primarily just due to animation irregularity more than them being too complicated. These inconsistencies are so numerous and intricate that to write rules around them would end up being extremely technical and not in a fun way. Things would take forever, but there wouldn't really be anything interesting gained from all that complexity. Unlike, for example, managing combat and your creatures while making sure your workers are placed well and the economy is stable. That is excessively complicated, but it's also really funny. I came to this realization while I was drafting and testing simple combat concepts. I was trying to fit them all into the mold that the show gives us. The only real source for this, however, is just the Wandering Bald Man versus Pig fight, which is frustratingly a small amount of information while also being very specific information. So all the stuff I made, at least in my opinion, sucked. It was either too slow to resolve a boring fight or really predictable and brief. So I did some research. I looked at the combat systems from a lot of comparable games that I already owned that I felt had good variable combat. Duelist 2, Root, Inscription, Magic the Gathering, and Into the Breach. Despite how the combat systems in these games feel to play, the actual base functions are unbelievably simple. In Duelist 2, you attack a creature and then they attack you back. In the board game Root, you roll hits and deal damage that remove your units and enemy units based on the damage each side took. In Inscription, creatures just attack what's in front of them. In Magic the Gathering, you declare attacks and the other player assigns blockers and those creatures block or die. And Into the Breach, you simply shoot or melee things until they die. But what all these games had, something that mine didn't, was content. The depth and fun of their combat systems arose from the mingling of keywords and unique abilities of creatures, units, and factions. This meant I needed those things too. In retrospect, it should have been obvious. I had been testing out the combat with creatures that just had stats with no text. In my mind, it made sense that if my combat system was truly good, it would be fun and work even without those variables. And I was wrong. Even though it was still too early in development to know what sort of abilities or stats cards should have, it doesn't matter and I'd never know until I just did it and made them. Maybe I was just intimidated by the idea of running into the darkness like that. Similar to MTG, I put in a keyword system, although I didn't do much with it at this point. Then, I gave the cards tags. Now, I had seen this suggestion many times, but essentially, cards will have tags on them that refer to their traits, elements, and features. These tags are effectively meaningless, but they will allow cards to interact with each other by referring to specific tags. For example, a structure that melts ice and cold creatures who enter its space, so any cards with those tags, ice and cold, would be affected by that. With these things in mind, I created a bunch of cards. They are very chaotic and arbitrary. I made them incredibly diverse, going from completely useless to overwhelmingly broken, which is sort of what the game and the show has. I'm not entirely sure what will happen with balancing, because on one hand, the game isn't balanced, but on the other, certain things shouldn't be so crazy that they invalidate all other cards or mechanics. Essentially just being free win cards if drawn, with no prerequisites to use. For now, it's not super important, because I'm going to be testing with mirrored decks. I also threw some stuff in there that I didn't define at all. I made a card which refers to a non-existent money mechanic, and 2 keywords, chaotic and worker, which were undefined. I did this mostly for fun, but I thought including these things might spark some ideas about how such things might work when actually implemented in the future. I'll now let you look at them. Feel free to pause and read over the cards if you'd like. There will be some playtest footage up ahead where we put all this into practice. If you're interested in contributing card art or just want to participate more and support me, please consider becoming a member. Members get behind the scenes perks, but they also make this project possible and will allow me to work on these videos full time, so I would really appreciate it. I still don't know exactly what to do about land cards. I think they'll be extremely element specific and their effects will be tied directly to the strategy of the element, like how cornfields are tied directly to the game plan of the corn element. So until I start making decks and cards that fall under specific elements, I'll be putting that off as a problem for future Caleb. Next, I put together a combat system based on my research. While designing, I began to change my interpretation of some of the things we see in the show. It's possible that scenes like the Wandering Baldman versus Pig fight, as depicted, are entirely flavor. In reality, the pig simply does 2 to 3 damage depending on your interpretation, and the Wandering Baldman does 1. The back and forth doesn't actually happen, the game just makes it look like it does because that's more fun to watch. I think there's a lot of flexibility gained from this interpretation, and so the system I'm about to describe takes advantage of the liberties I just talked about. This combat system is not perfectly defined, but it's more than functional. During a player's battle phase, they may activate creatures to attack, or move an attack. You do not have to activate a creature to move it within your own kingdom, but must activate creatures in order for them to cross between kingdoms or to enter a land containing an enemy creature or structure, even if it's within your own kingdom. Once a player activates a card during their battle phase, that and all other following actions become purely hypothetical. After the player has declared all of their actions that they are planning on taking, the opposing player gets to take their reaction phase. During a player's reaction phase, they can activate creatures to defend against attacks occurring in their land. Creatures activated to defend while in an enemy kingdom cannot move. Activated creatures which are currently in their controller's kingdom may move 1 space so long as they move into a land with an activated enemy creature. Players may also flip cards and play spells during this phase, but they may not play creatures or structures. All creatures activated, not flooped, during this turn are considered battling. Cards activated on the opponent's previous turn are not considered battling unless targeted directly. Structures in lands with enemy creatures are always considered battling. After the reaction phase, the combat resolves in all lands where there are battling cards. Both sides add up the total attack from their cards, and then each player distributes the damage they have taken between the health of their own battling cards present. Any excess damage is then distributed by the attacking player between any of the other non-battling cards if they are present. If you're battling and there are enemies present in the land, but no enemy cards with attack values are also battling, you may select an individual card present, exhausted or not, and target it. This target card is considered battling and will fight back as normal if it has an attack value. If this target card is killed and your creature survived, you may select another target on this land and battle it. This can be repeated as many times as you'd like until your creature dies. After all battles have been resolved, any creatures that cross from their kingdom to the enemy kingdom on this turn may move back to their previous space. Creatures may stay on the enemy side of the board if they wish. The reason you leave your creatures in the enemy kingdom is that players cannot play structure or creature cards in lands that contain enemy creatures. I know that explanation was pretty complicated, but until I set things in stone and move on to open playtesting, I don't want to spend tons of time making a perfect rulebook explanation. Now we actually have the whole soup. Turn structure, combat, and cards. I'm ready to taste it. We did a lot of internal playtesting, and I don't know how to say this, but it was incredibly fun. It wasn't just like sort of fun with obvious potential, but it was just straight up fun. Roll the footage. I mean, it is like these minds are cradling Magiculon in such a way that it is impossible for me to get to him without dying. But if I don't get to him, his scroll of Firestorm is going to slowly kill me. Yeah. I'm going to move here. I'm going to activate the Mindhole Lizard. I'm going to throw a pumpkin at Magiculon. I'm going to play my nuclear missile wand on my lizard.
No!
And, then on my battle phase, I'm going to activate my cube, my murder cube, to attack your Mindhole Lizard here. And then I'm going to activate my lizard with its wand to shoot a nuclear missile here. What are you going to do?
Oh, shoot. Yeah, I'm going to Visage of Death my Mindhole Lizard. And the Visage of Death can't be attacked.
Oh my god. So this doesn't happen then.
Since it's still the Visage of Death, my Mindhole Lizard is going to do something brave and beautiful. I'm going to attach the nuclear missile wand to my Mindhole Lizard.
Okay.
And I am going to floop him to attack the current land that he's standing on.
Okay, great.
Do you have a response?
Do I have a response to that? I'm going to swap places with your Wisp baby and give the Scroll of Firestorm to the Mindhole Lizard. And that means at the end of this turn, all of your creatures, everything on your side of the board takes 1 damage. And my Mindhole Lizard takes...
Rest in peace, baby Wisp. Beetle goes down?
Okay, beetle.
Oh, beetle, big beetle. All right, beetle, visage of death on the beetle.
I'm gonna tell Magiculon to go here. I'm gonna activate the 2 hands.
And you had to activate Magiculon to move him across the board, so
Yes,
Magiculon
yeah.
cannot attack. Okay.
No, he can move and attack, so he's gonna attempt to attack this thing.
Oh, okay.
So he's gonna move and attack. The 2 hands is gonna move and attack here, and then what would that be? 3, and I need to do 4. Then 2 of my root babies are gonna go here. So this is what it's battling.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna play River of Boats.
Okay. Whoa.
I hate how this game is fun, and it's like there are 2 functions to the game so far. I hate it. I hate that it's working.
Why?
What the
Why?
hell?
I don't know what to say. Just like before, the cards being goofy and off the wall made the experience great. Most card games are very restrained due to their careful balancing and competitive nature. This was not like that at all. Stuff was just happening. It was spontaneous and chaotic, but the turn structure and combat were coherent and anchoring it all down. Even if you don't like the combat system I've put here, that's not the point of what I've made. What I've made is a miniature gameplay loop, so I can drag and drop things in and out for proper testing. The next thing I'm going to do is design several different combat systems and be swapping them in and out, so I'll actually be able to tell if they're good or not, instead of just looking at them on paper and trying to predict if they work as I intended. Before I go, I have a few notes and afterwards a community highlight. Once again, featuring everyone's favorite completely unique and original Adventure Time OC, Globulin. Say hi to Globulin, everybody. Notes time. When Jake floops his volcano, it destroys everything on his side of the board, but somehow his Husker Knights survive, even though they were on the board just like his earlings, which we see die. I had an idea I've decided definitely not to use, where the card art defines the keywords or tags. You would literally look at the art and use that to determine what characteristics the card has, like flying or armored or has a shield. But this would restrict people's art a lot and be way too ambiguous. Lots of people have been talking about what the numbers on the cards mean, and it has been somewhat concluded that they could mean literally anything, since there are no instances where we see them predict anything accurately. While I think that this is a really funny concept, the cards will have to have stats on them somehow, and just because we aren't sure doesn't mean I can't make a conclusion. I've read the comic for research, which I'd recommend, but the only definite new rule we learned from that comic is that you determine the first player using a coin flip, with one side of the coin featuring a pizza and the other with a donut. Also, I've still got to figure out how range stacks work. Even though I technically had them in this game at the point, every other time we used them it just felt like an edge case or it wasn't being applied right, so that'll come in the next video. Okay, as usual, I've been reading as many comments and suggestions as I can, and I'm going to spotlight 3 cards made by community members. The first one is this semi-frozen dino made by Only Yeti on Discord, for the yet-to-be-defined frozen-like element. I think the ability is really unique despite its simplicity, already taking advantage of the board aspect of the game, and the art is just so cute and creative and feels thematically tied into the card's ability. The next is Pete Moss, created by the Code Nerd on Discord. I love how the ability is so specific, but at this point in development technically means nothing at all because it's referring to mechanics that don't exist. Plus, the art feels like it would fit right into the style of CardWars. It's just such a fun and friendly design you wouldn't expect to see in any game but CardWars, perfectly capturing the more non-serious nature of a lot of the game we see depicted. The last one is Goblin Magic, created by @CorvidWizard on Twitter and Instagram. The ability of the card is straightforward, but in a very general way that has a lot of potential for emergent gameplay with other cards. And the art is funny and adorable in the most perfect way. I mean, just look at it. It's hard not to smile. This is obviously just 3 cards picked out of so much awesome art and so many fun ideas. I am so grateful to have such an amazing and creative community like you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please do the stuff, like and subscribe and all that. It really helps me out, and if you'd like to help me a bit more, please consider becoming a member. It really supports the project. Bye-bye.